Good morning and welcome back to Football League World TV. We are going to be putting the spotlight on West Bromwich Albion in the next 15 to 20 minutes, discussing Carlos Corberan's appointment at the Hawthorns and whether or not it is ultimately going to be a success and an experiment that works for the Baggies. I'm your host, Alfie Burns, and I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague, Marcus Ali. Marcus, how are you getting on this morning?
Yeah, really well. Thanks, Alfie. Great to see Corberán back in the Championship. I was caught a little bit off guard by the announcement that I think it was about 11:26 p.m. the other night. But good to see them get it done all the same. It's been an interesting wait to see Steve Bruce's successor. So glad to be on talking about it today.
Yeah, Corberán only leaving Huddersfield what feels like a couple of months ago. What is only a couple of months ago. So plenty to discuss with this. As always, we're streaming across Facebook, YouTube and Twitter this morning. So if you're joining us and want to get your thoughts in the comments on Corberan's appointment at West Brom and whether he's going to be a success, please do. We'll look to get those up on the show. As you said, Marcus, West Brom getting us in the middle of the night with Carlos Corberan's appointment on a 2.5-year deal as West Brom's new head coach. What's your initial reaction to the appointment?
It's a good appointment. I think when you look at what he did last season, it's very hard to argue that right now Carlos Corberan is not a good Championship manager. My initial reaction, having clicked on the link and read the length of his contract, was I hope he gets to see it out. Obviously, 2.5 years, we do see much longer contracts handed out into today's game as a sign of ambition or, owners trying to show that they've got a long-term plan. But I think it's realistic, 2.5 years. I think there's almost an argument that is long-term, given the state of play in the Championship at the moment. So, I think it's a good appointment. He does strike me as a manager that's maybe more skilled or specialist in setting up a team defensively than making them play very exciting attack in football. West Brom, for me, the defence hasn't really been the problem over the last couple of seasons, and probably even this season, bar substandard goalkeepers, really. But all the same, I definitely think it's an upgrade on Steve Bruce, someone that sort of learned his trade under Marcelo Bielsa at Leeds and then showed what he could do last season at Huddersfield after taking some time and being shown faith from the board at the John Smith Stadium to sort of give him time to not fail, but make some mistakes before really showing what he's about. So, I think it's a very exciting appointment. There were some other names rumoured with the job that I was less enthusiastic about than Corberán. So, after what was an outstanding achievement last season, it's great to see him as a Championship follower back in the league so soon.
Yeah, you mentioned there that he got given the time at Huddersfield and they sort of flirted with relegation in his first season in charge. There's actually a little room for error at West Brom this year. He's picking up a squad sitting 23rd in the table. They've won only twice in the opening 16 fixtures of the season. They've drawn 8 times, though, which I think is equal with Burnley as the most in the division. So plenty to work on. What do you think Carlos Corberan needs to change immediately within that West Brom squad?
Well, there's a couple of things for me that are holding back West Brom more than anything. One is that they've conceded the first goal in 10 of 16 Championship matches this season, 63%. Very tough to put any kind of positive run together if you're starting games as slowly as that. Secondly, I think he's got to line up a goalkeeper for January. I don't want to keep banging on about it, but I don't think Alex Palmer or David Button are up to the standard where West Brom want to be. Maybe exaggerated even more by the quality that they've had in goal with Sam Johnston over the last few years, but I think that's definitely something that will need to be identified quite soon. And then also, I'm not sure how he goes about doing this, but some kind of mentality reset to change the mindset. I think there's been a lot of desperation in the attacking third from West Brom this season. So desperate to turn their fortunes around and stop the rot that it's kind of led to a lack of composure in their finishing. It's easier said than done, but I think there needs to be some kind of reset there, whether he leans on individuals that have had less playing time at the start of this season, I don't know, but that's definitely, finishing has been something that's plagued them consistently since they last dropped out of the Premier League. So a lot to change. I think it's a huge positive that he's going to have that time on the training ground during the World Cup to really get his methods across and assess his squad, because it is quite a big squad, and that I do think there's probably quite a lot that needs to change before they can properly compete for promotion in division. But yeah, in the short term, obviously looking at where they are in the league, sort of relieving supporters' relegation fears will be the first thing on his to-do list, and obviously putting the groundwork in to be able to achieve that as soon as possible.
As we touched on right at the top of the show, success in leading Huddersfield to the playoff final last season for Corberán. They finished third after 46 games as well in such a competitive division on such a small budget. It's a great achievement. Since then, he's managed in Greece with Olympiacos, a really high-profile job in Greece, and ultimately failed. I think it was only 11 fixtures that Corberán lasted. We'll get into Huddersfield next, but let's just talk about that little spell in Greece that Corberán's had, Max. Is it a slight concern for you?
It's not for me. I think it's such a different job in comparison to what is an early season relegation battle at the Hawthorns, being expected to go out and win the Greek Super League title. There's not much evidence to say he would not have gone on and done that anyway. Olympiacos weren't a mile off when he was dismissed in terms of the league standings. So I do suspect that this was probably some kind of breakdown in relations off the pitch that saw them pull the trigger so early. I think it was quite harsh. So no, I'm not reading into it too much. Had he maybe taken a year off after getting sacked by Olympiacos and then come back into the Championship, maybe we'd be thinking about it as a little bit more concerning. But given the fact he was producing a very strong performance at Wembley Stadium with Huddersfield a matter of months ago, I'm not too concerned about whatever went on in his little Greek excursion.
We'll get on to some positives, because there are ultimately positives for West Brom here, given what Corberán achieved in the Championship last season. That was on quite a small budget at Huddersfield, and Huddersfield obviously adapting to the loss of their own parachute payments. For me, West Brom have got a better squad on paper than what Huddersfield had last season, but their money, their relative parachute payments, they're not going to stretch on forever. Just sort of a little left field question that maybe not a lot of people are talking about at the minute, but do you think that Corberán's been brought in with his ability to work on that small budget at Huddersfield in mind, bearing in mind what might come for West Brom in the coming years?
Yeah, I would think so. I think when you're looking at his CV and the work experience on that, Huddersfield is definitely relevant in comparing it to West Brom. Two clubs that sort of recently come out of the Premier League, at least when Corberán took over at Huddersfield anyway, moving towards that change in approach in the transfer market due to the difficult financial climate that you come into after stopping being in receipt of parachute payments. The Baggies will be headed towards that next season, or a huge turnaround this season anyway. So yeah, I definitely think that's a relevant point and something that he showed that he has the skills to achieve success and a lofty position in the league table on a fine budget. Having said that, I do think it's quite a strange squad if it is better on paper than the one that Huddersfield had last season. But I think you've got a fair few underperforming players on quite long-term contracts in that squad. So that's going to be quite difficult to manage. Often, potentially, the boardroom could be a little bit worried or surprised if he's leaving the likes of Jake Livermore or other players in the squad who have been good servants for the Baggies, sort of out of the side and looking to sort of regenerate the playing squad. I'm not sure how achievable that's going to be, and it could cause a strain on relations. I do think it's a difficult squad to manage because there's plenty of players in that squad, and it is a bulky one, that are going to be hard to shift. And that's talking in January in the summer transfer window as well. So it's a long-term project. I think it has to be seen as that. But yeah, given what he did at Huddersfield, able to bring in some very impressive free transfers, what kind of sway he had in that, I'm not sure. I think it was probably more the hierarchy at Huddersfield. But no, it's definitely a relevant job, and there's plenty of parallels to be drawn between the two.
I saw a lot of Corberán's Huddersfield over 2 years at the John Smith Stadium, and one thing that stood out was how tactically aware Corberán seemed to be. It was a nightmare picking his predicted 11s, more the system than the personnel, I've got to say. There was a real mix last season of 4-4-2, 3-4-3, 3-5-2, 4-3-3. There was all kinds of systems in and out of possession, and that was sometimes in game and not just from week to week as well. So looking at the West Brom squad that he's inheriting, then Marcus, what do you think is the best system to get the best out of their best players?
There's a few. I think their strengths probably do lie in wide areas. That said, I think advanced wide areas. I would not feel comfortable playing three at the back with West Brom. I don't think their wing backs are good enough. I think that's such an important position when you play that kind of system. For me, the likes of Darnell Furlong and Connor Townsend are much more effective in a back four. I think they can almost limit you when they're picking the ball up in such advanced areas. I think they should move away from three at the back, given the personnel at Corberan's disposal. That could well change after the January transfer window, but for me, they're not strong enough in that area to be playing three at the back with regularity in possession, at least anyway. So I kind of settled on a 4-3-3. I think they have to prepare to be without Daryl DK long term. I think anything they get from him, given his struggles since joining last January, needs to be treated as a bonus. You need to sort of prepare for worst case in that kind of situation. So I settled on a 4-3-3. I think you can field two wingers there and potentially John Swift as a number 8, potentially with Taylor Gardner-Hickman as well, two players that can contribute goals and assists from midfield, and then with just one midfield anchor, whether you go with Jake Livermore, Okay Yakuslu, or Jason Malumbi, that would potentially be my preferred option out of those three as a more deeper lying midfield player. I think they really need to get the best out of John Swift to pull themselves out of the predicament that they're in. And I think in a number 8 role, he might be able to do that, combining with wide players. So yeah, obviously it's going to be hard to second guess what he's going to go with. And he did play a 3 at the back quite a lot at Huddersfield, but I don't think he's got as good wing backs as he had at Huddersfield. He doesn't have Toffolo and Sorba Thomas or even a Peeper to come in when you don't have when he wants to switch it up. So yeah, I would recommend 4 at the back formation, but it's going to be fascinating to see what he goes with. For me, I'll be looking to what can get the best out of John Swift and those wide players. So a 4-3-3 would be maybe something that I'd definitely consider.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. I think looking back at Corberan's first 6 months in charge at Huddersfield, he did prefer the 4-3-3, and they had success with that. And it was only injuries and lack of form that forced him away from that. So I can definitely see a 4-3-3 there. Another talking point from Corberan's spell at Huddersfield, particularly last season, was their threat from set pieces. That was really down to Danel Sinani and Sorba Thomas and their delivery from free kicks and corners. But I think it was something like a third of Huddersfield's goals last season in the Championship did come from set pieces. Do you think that that's a particular tactic he's going to look to utilise at West Brom?
Potentially. Obviously, you do want to have more threats than that. You don't want to be so reliant, but given the way it worked last season for Huddersfield, if it wasn't for set piece goals, their season would have panned out completely differently. So yeah, it'd definitely be something to focus on, an area that he's proven that he's one of the sort of specialist managers in that regard in the division. And I think West Brom's squad suits up quite well to look to utilise set piece situations. Jed Wallace was outstanding from dead balls in his days at Millwall. We haven't seen it so much, but yeah, there's even other players that can contribute there. They've got the aerial threats for sure. The likes of Semi Ajayi, Kyle Bartley, Dara O'Shea, Jake Livermore scored from a set piece this season. So yeah, it's not something you want to hang your hat on as West Brom's sort of main thing to target to pull themselves out of the bottom 3. But set piece goals can make such a huge difference in the marginal gains in the Championship. So yeah, definitely something to focus on. And I think obviously Sorba Thomas was so crucial in that last season, but I think Jed Wallace has the ability to contribute just as much as well.
Let's look ahead to what's to come for Corberán then before the World Cup break in mid-November. It's Sheffield United at home first up at the Hawthorns this weekend. They've also got Blackpool and Stoke City at home before the World Cup, and a quite daunting trip to Queen's Park Rangers at the minute. How important do you think it is for Corberán, firstly, that he hits the ground running, because that could well set him up for quite a successful stint in charge if it gets off on on the wrong foot, then it might be a very different story.
Yeah, it's going to come to a point soon where we have to start talking about West Brom as serious relegation fodder. We're over a third of the way through the season now. Performances have been better than results, but they've won the least games in the Championship. There's teams above them that maybe we expected to be closer to the bottom three, grinding results out on quite a regular basis where the Baggies aren't. So, yeah, it's going to be really important. Getting them out of the bottom three would get the fans on side pretty quickly as well. You read out those 4 fixtures, none of them are sort of scream 3 points. Even Blackpool at the moment, the form Jerry Yates is in, is something of a tough task. So, yeah, I think it's going to be important for him to start quickly. That said, I do kind of see this as more of a survival mission than anything else for this season. I think the time to judge Corberán would be after at least sort of 2 or 3 transfer windows, maybe towards the back end of next season, if he's able to keep them in the Championship. So, yeah, it's going to be very important. That said, again, if they're not able to haul themselves out of the bottom 3, I would back Corberán to eventually do it after the World Cup when he's had more time to get his ideology across to the players. So, yeah, it's going to be very important, particularly for the fans. I'd love to go into the World Cup feeling a little bit less anxious about where their club are in the league table. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. But for me, I think it's you've got to judge him looking more to the long term. If they do continue to struggle for points, I think the blame doesn't all fall at his door.
Let's look to wrap things up then. Last couple of questions from me. Do you kind of feel like this is a mid to long term appointment then? I think you've sort of touched on that already.
I think it has to be. The West Brom board have been extremely trigger happy over the last decade or so. There's a handful of managers that I think were very harshly dealt with when West Brom were in much better positions in the Football League or even the Premier League than this. So, yeah, something has to change. They need to stick with someone. I think given what happened with Steve Bruce, with the benefit of hindsight, probably even the board would admit it was the wrong decision to get rid of Valérien Ismaël last season. So, yeah, I think they definitely need to see this as medium to long term. And that would sort of involve being realistic with your expectations as well. This season, given the way they've been playing, and like I said, the difficult nature of the squad with players on long-term contracts and underperforming players at that, having them comfortably in mid-table and not having relegation fears by the end of the season would probably have to be seen as a success. And then looking forward to next season, maybe after a full season in charge, you can judge Corberán, and then the real season where the judgment comes is not next season, the one after that when he's in the final year of his contract. Sometimes high manager turnover can work if you get the appointments right. West Brom have not been getting the appointments right in recent years, so it would almost be a risk to get rid of him given their track record of bringing in managers. So, yeah, I think this has to be seen as a long-term thing. They're way off the playoffs last year, even though they showed promise at early stages of the season. So, yeah, they need to be realistic about their expectations. They're entering a very tricky financial climate, moving away from parachute payments as well. So having to pay off multiple managers doesn't help things at all. And I think the way that Corberán was able to set up Huddersfield last season and even the season prior to that would suggest that the Baggies are going to be safe from anything too catastrophic in terms of dropping to League One in that 2.5-year contract at least. So, yeah, it has to be seen as a long-term project. They need to have patience in him, and I think what he achieved last season suggests that he deserves that.
That concludes our look at Corberán at West Brom. Thanks for your insight there, Marcus. Some really good points. I feel like you've touched upon, fingers crossed for West Brom, that it does work for Carlos Corberan, a really talented manager there. So it's good to see him back in the Championship, as we said right at the top of the show. Coming up later in the week on Football League World TV, I'm sure we'll be looking ahead to the weekend's action and what's to come in the Championship, League One and League Two. So make sure you join us again tomorrow for that. But between now and then, take care. We'll speak to you soon.